Hey gang, welcome to Transformation Tuesday. My name is Chris Winters, and today I want to share a topic with you that I'm really passionate about, and that is the process of human change. It's kind of a messy topic, but you've probably heard me say this before. When human change happens, man, it's magical. It always is. And why is it magical? Why is it magical when somebody goes from homeless to Harvard, or somebody loses, like 100, 150 pounds or 200 pounds and completely changes their life around, or somebody goes from uneducated to educated? Why is that magic? Well, unfortunately, it's because it doesn't happen very often. Now, I'm not claiming to have all the answers here, but I want to share with you some of my thought processes as I'm going along the way and learning about life and my process, and I want to share that with you guys. So, there's a situation that happens every day with all of us. It's happened to us in the past. It's happening to us right now as you're listening to this, including myself, and that is this. We know exactly what we want to do in a particular area of our lives. We're motivated. We've seen others do it. We want to do it. Yeah, we know it can be done. We have all the information to do it, yet it doesn't seem to happen. What's going on in that process? Well, again, not claiming to have all the answers, but I've got something that's worked very well for me. There's a book out there. It's called A Path of Least Resistance by Ritz. And in the beginning of it, he talks about walking down the streets of Boston. Now, if you've ever walked down the streets of Boston, particularly in old parts of Boston, you'll notice something very kind of strange about the streets there. And what is that? Well, the streets are kind of all jacked up, and there's just something intuitively wrong with them. And how did that happen? Well, when the city of Boston started laying down streets, what they did is they just paved over existing cow paths. So in part, the city planning of Boston was created from the mindset of the 17th century cow. Now, although that's kind of funny, it does make sense. Why does it make sense? Well, it makes sense because of this. See, the cows have already found the path of least resistance, and we just paved over them. Now, the problem with this is that most of us pave over the paths of least resistance unconsciously. Now, when you do this in your brain, there's a process that's called myelinization. Now, I'm not going to get too technical here. Why? Because I can. Basically, what myelinization is that when you think a particular thought that leads to an emotion or a belief system or what's possible, it fires off neurons in a particular pattern. And when that happens, your brain lays down something called myelin, and myelin connects all those neurons together, forming a thought, a belief system on here. And when you go back to revisit that, it layers down another layer of myelin and another layer of myelin when you go back to it. And pretty soon what you've done is you've laid down a cow path of thought patterns that go from a street to a freeway to an interstate. So when you go to think, now you just get in your thinking car and you get on that freeway that you built with myelin and just drive down, and it brings you to the same destination that you've always arrived at here. Now, some of the challenges here are that how did we arrive at the thought patterns that we did? Well, normally thought patterns, like everything in human life pretty much, is we follow the path of least resistance, very similar to cows. And when our thought process follows the path of least resistance and we start to lay down that myelinization, usually the end result becomes counterproductive to where we want to go. Hence, we come back to, we know what we want to do, we're motivated to do it, we've got all the information on how to get there, and again, this can be in any area of your life, yet it doesn't happen. Why? Because we're still following on the freeways of patterns that were built over time, that were formed from the process of least resistance. And how does that process happen? Well, in short terms, it happens because we're kind of instant gratification thinkers. How do we get from A to B as quickly as possible? So, one tool I use, I know many of you have heard me talk about this before, but it's worth reiterating, is how do you form new freeways? How do you form new freeways so that you can end up getting the results that you want? Well, the way that I've done it that works terrific for me is I visualize. I visualize in great detail the end result that I want on different areas of my life. And I revisit that for 30 to 60 seconds at each and every meal. So I'm doing this 4 to 6 times per day. And every time I do this, the neurons are firing off. I'm laying down a layer of myelin, and pretty soon I've got not a cow path, but I've got a freeway, an interstate going right to the direction that I want to, and that's the new path that I drive on. Hey, my name is Chris Winters. I hope you found some value in this.